Ukraine's decision to wait for Russia's bridge trap and then turn it into a perfect ambush represents one of the most remarkable moments of the ongoing war. The story begins with a seemingly ordinary tactical move by Russian forces, but what unfolded demonstrates the extraordinary patience, intelligence, and adaptive thinking of Ukraine's military. Russia, relying on conventional doctrine and overwhelming firepower, attempted to control the tempo of battle by constructing and defending a bridge that would serve as both a bait and a choke point. Their calculation was that Ukraine, pressured by the need to maintain momentum and driven by necessity, would rush to engage and thereby walk into a carefully designed trap. On the surface, this appeared to be an intelligent approach, one grounded in historical precedent, as armies throughout history have used bridges to funnel their enemies into vulnerable positions. Yet the very element that made this move appealing to Russia, its predictability, was the flaw that Ukraine exploited with devastating precision. From the beginning, Ukraine's response was shaped not by impulsive reaction, but by quiet observation. They watched the build-up around the bridge, tracked the movements of Russian engineers and supply convoys, and studied the rhythm of troop rotations. They had drones overhead, satellites monitoring from above, and intelligence networks feeding real-time updates. They noted when equipment arrived, when defensive measures were reinforced, and when Russian confidence began to grow. Rather than viewing the bridge as a threat that needed to be neutralized immediately, Ukraine viewed it as a stage, a platform on which Russia was preparing to expose itself. This patience was not without risk, for allowing an enemy to entrench around such a critical point can often yield lasting disadvantages. But Ukraine calculated that the long-term payoff would outweigh the short-term dangers. As days passed, Russia invested more heavily in its trap. More troops were funneled into the area, more vehicles lined the approaches, and more supplies were staged nearby to sustain prolonged operations. To Russian commanders, this was the image of control. Ukraine had not attacked, the trap appeared to be working, and momentum seemed to lie with them. What they could not see was that every addition of troops and equipment was also an addition of vulnerability. The more weight they placed on the bridge and its approaches, the more catastrophic the outcome would be if that vulnerability was suddenly exploited. Ukraine was essentially letting its enemy build the foundations of its own disaster. When the moment of execution arrived, it unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed maneuver. Ukrainian forces struck first with drones, targeting vehicles at the front and middle of the convoy to create instant blockages. Within seconds, the column was immobilized, with vehicles trapped behind unable to advance and those in front unable to retreat. Artillery fire followed, landing on clustered equipment that had no room to maneuver. Precision-guided missiles destroyed command vehicles and ammunition carriers, creating secondary explosions that amplified the chaos. The bridge itself became a liability, with sections collapsing under the strain of both weight and strikes, sending some vehicles into the water below. What had been intended as a carefully prepared trap by Russia was turned into a killing zone by Ukraine's patience and planning. The effectiveness of this ambush lay not only in the destruction it caused, but also in the safety it preserved for Ukrainian forces. By refusing to walk into the initial trap, Ukraine avoided exposing its troops to concentrated fire. Instead, they operated from distance, relying on drones and precision artillery rather than direct assaults. This reduced risk meant that while Russia suffered catastrophic losses, Ukraine preserved its manpower for future operations. It was a demonstration of how safety and effectiveness can align when intelligence and discipline guide decision-making. The unique nature of this ambush sets it apart in the long history of warfare. Armies have always known the dangers of choke points, but rarely has one side demonstrated such restraint in allowing an opponent to fully commit before striking. The use of modern technology further elevated the operation. Drones acted as the eyes, providing constant surveillance, while precision missiles acted as the hands, delivering accurate blows exactly where they would cause the most disruption. The ambush combined ancient principles of patience with cutting-edge tools of modern conflict, creating a hybrid strategy that reflects the evolving nature of warfare in the 21st century. The cost of the operation was starkly uneven. Russia lost vehicles, ammunition, and soldiers in large numbers, but perhaps the greatest loss was confidence. An army that relies on intimidation and momentum cannot afford to have its carefully prepared traps turned against it. The psychological damage of seeing their own plan inverted weighed heavily on Russian troops, many of whom began to question the reliability of their leadership and the safety of their positions. Ukraine, on the other hand, paid a much smaller price. Every operation consumes resources and carries some risk. But the asymmetry here was extraordinary. For the cost of a limited number of precision weapons and drones, Ukraine inflicted a loss on Russia that reverberated far beyond the battlefield. The broader implications of this ambush cannot be overstated. For Ukraine, it demonstrated an evolution from reactive defense to proactive strategic thinking. Early in the war, much of Ukraine's focus was on survival, repelling Russian advances and holding key cities. Over time, however, they have developed the confidence and capability to shape the battlefield, turning Russia's strength into weakness. This ambush became not only a tactical success but also a symbolic one, proving that Ukraine could outthink as well as outfight its opponent. For Russia, the operation was a sobering reminder that brute force and conventional doctrine are no longer sufficient in modern war. The reliance on traps, massed armor, and predictable patterns of engagement exposed vulnerabilities that Ukraine has learned to exploit. It forced Russian commanders to reconsider their approaches, making them more cautious in subsequent operations, which in turn slowed their overall momentum. The fear of another ambush became almost as powerful as the ambush itself, shaping Russian behavior long after the smoke had cleared. Looking at the historical parallels, this ambush resonates with lessons from centuries of warfare. Hannibal's encirclement of Roman forces at Cannae, where patience and timing allowed a smaller force to envelop a larger one, echoes in Ukraine's waiting strategy. The use of bridges as traps has appeared in conflicts from medieval Europe to the Second World War, but rarely has the outcome been so thoroughly reversed. Ukraine took a timeless concept, the danger of choke points, and turned it into a modern demonstration of how information and technology can transform the battlefield. Psychologically, the event boosted Ukrainian morale to new heights. Soldiers on the ground witnessed firsthand the rewards of discipline and patience, reinforcing trust in their commanders and in the broader strategy. Civilians too drew strength from the story, seeing it as evidence that their nation could not only defend itself, but also deliver clever and decisive blows against a more powerful adversary. Internationally, the ambush became a talking point among allies, further justifying continued military aid by showing that advanced equipment placed in Ukrainian hands yields tangible results. Economically and politically, the operation also carried weight. Russia's loss of expensive vehicles and equipment added to the strain of a prolonged conflict, while Ukraine's success strengthened its diplomatic position. Nations considering whether to extend further support saw clear evidence that Ukraine could use modern weapons systems effectively and responsibly, in an era where narratives shape policy. This ambush provided Ukraine with a narrative of intelligence triumphing over brute strength, a story that resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield. The legacy of this ambush will likely endure as a case study in military academies. It demonstrates how patience can be weaponized, how intelligence can turn the tables, and how technology can amplify traditional tactics. It also shows that war is not just a contest of strength, but of adaptability. Ukraine proved that even in the face of superior numbers, an army that observes, waits, and strikes at the right moment can shift the balance. Every aspect of the ambush reflects this theme of inversion. A trap turned into a disaster for its creator, a bridge that symbolized control becoming a symbol of vulnerability, an apparent advantage transformed into a crushing defeat. The story reinforces the timeless lesson that overco. Confidence is often the greatest weakness in war, and that those who wait for the right moment often prevail over those who rush forward, blinded by their own plans. In the end, Ukraine's handling of Russia's bridge trap is more than just a military maneuver. It is a statement of resilience, intelligence, and evolving capability. It proves that Ukraine has moved beyond merely surviving the war. It is shaping its course with strategic foresight. The ambush will be remembered not just for the vehicles destroyed or the soldiers lost, but for what it represents. The triumph of patience over haste, of information over assumption, and of adaptability over rigidity. It stands as a defining moment in the conflict, a reminder to the world that battles are not always won by those who appear strongest, but by those who think, wait, and strike with precision when the opportunity arises.